All right, B, C, and D of old business is the from the policy committee.
Well, B is not necessarily. A year ago, I called the board president and superintendent, and I asked that the board have a discussion about outside groups, which includes boosters, foundation, and any other group that participates in this building and these activities, and to discuss, you know, what are some minimum standards that we have, minimum disclosures, minimum insurance, what should the board require them to do. And I was promised that the policy committee would find out about that, come back the next meeting, and it never came back to the board for discussion. So I see later on in the agenda, a new item is going to talk about one of the specific groups, perhaps. We heard some visitor comments from that, but this item back then, September 14th, 2010, almost 1 year ago, was an item I thought the board should address. And it's been sitting out there for a year. You know, we had a lot of meetings since April, and we had a lot of business to attend to. We never got around to doing that, but is it a policy thing? The potential item there to approve these policies are in effect. They're in the board policy manual, so it's not like we're going to vote on these policies, but we need to, you know, talk about the outside groups and what responsibilities they should have. I know we talked about in the facilities thing, if certain groups come in and they deal with kids, one of the visitors says, should we have background checks for those people? And I think I had a conversation with one of the board members where maybe that would be a good idea. But would we have to do something like that for the Mustang football team who deals with all adults on the football field? It may not be appropriate for that type of thing. So this is something I brought up to the interim superintendent a year ago, and I asked specifically about the money that the boosters charges and for free admission, and I asked, when did the board ever give up the right to collect admissions at the sporting events in favor of the boosters membership? And so I asked for this discussion a year ago, and I see that it's on the agenda later tonight, but that's what this item was. And you know, prior to the election, some of the board members wanted to, you know, keep track of items that were on the agenda. Items would be on the agenda, then items wouldn't be on the agenda. Then items would surface again on the agenda. You know, so we kind of asked, and that's what this 91410 represents, where if we're going to have something on the agenda and we don't resolve it as a board, it should remain on the agenda with the date that we started it, so that we can at least have an eyeball on when this item came up and hopefully resolving that item. So that was the background, and I brought this up at other meetings up in the room upstairs. You know, I mentioned that, you know, I had brought this up, and, you know, one of the things I had mentioned was, you know, if all this equipment is being given to the school, you know, there should be a procedure in place to accept it from the outside groups so that it can be properly placed on our insurance rolls. You know, I heard of a swimming scoreboard tonight, but I went back, and one of the first things I did was look at the meeting minutes from 2006 forward. And from 2006 forward, there's nothing in any of the meeting minutes where any outside group is coming in to give us the equipment that we're going to talk about later. So I would say for insurance purposes, we need to formalize that acceptance of whatever is being given to the school so it can be properly placed in our inventory of assets and properly placed on insurance rolls. And what if the scoreboard malfunctions? Now, whose responsibility is that malfunction to have fixed? Is there a warranty? I don't think any of us know about the scoreboard and if there's a warranty, because it hasn't been properly placed into presented to the board formally. So those were the sort of ideas I had and I wanted to discuss last September, and here we are 364 days later, and it's on the agenda. And that's my perception of what this whole business item is on the agenda B. Thank you.
So are you asking for C to be moved to B, and basically we have that discussion now? Mike, or?
I just think, as a governance item, we need to quantify and policy and get a handle on the outside groups and what we expect from them and how things work. I think some of the policies here talk about procedures for accepting these outside items, but, you know, I don't think there is any, you know, and I don't think you found any in the desk drawer when you got in the office. So that's something from an overall aspect we, as a board, need to get our arms around. And so
I'd like to say something. You'd be happy to know, as we were asked to do, a bunch of us read the policies. We've already proposed changes to 2 of them. One of them has to be redrafted, which I volunteered to do because I don't think right now they have a lot of staff to do it. We already drafted a policy for outside groups, a draft of it that also needs to be edited. So it took us a year to get there. You didn't accomplish it last time, but Kevin is on top of it. And the plan is to present the revised documents to the board at the next meeting of the whole, addressing the issues you have, except for one part of it. And we talked about this too, of administrative policies. The fact is, if the board policy, which the one on gifts does, says it's up to the superintendent to put a procedure in place, whether it's written or not, there's a procedure. And that's one thing we struggle with a lot with the boosters or anything else. You might not know what it is. In fact, you might not even agree with it, but the superintendent has that right. And, you know, it also says any gift received, our policy says all gifts received become the school's property. So if we want to change the policy and say we can't take gifts unless the people who donate them warrant them or maintain them, I guess we could consider doing that. But what we've done so far completely complies with the policy, which is our responsibility, setting the policy. If we don't like it, we should change it. And if we want Kevin, as people have said, to put these procedures in place and have them in writing so somebody could read them, then we talk to him about it. He's going to do that. But, you know, one thing that I'm struggling, I'll say it now because it's going to come up, it's the same thing with the trip. The fact is, we've been doing all kinds of things out of routine for a long time, and if we're going to look at them, to change them, in my opinion, yes, we should look at the policy, and we should vet it out, and we should look at the alternatives, discuss them, and talk about them. But what we're doing now is we have policies. The gift one seems like we're complied with it, or the boosters or whomever, and we shouldn't change them just because it's been on the agenda for a year. It's okay, we'll push it, we'll do it, let's do the right thing. But, you know, I know Matt and I read them all, and I know Kevin read them all, and, you know, I think you maybe didn't quite catch the way Matt said it, that the intent is the ones on the list we're going to provide proposed changes or adopt as they are from Kevin's counsel at the next committee on the whole. And it's unfortunate, I guess, for you that hadn't been done previously, but we are where we are.
I want to build on Tim too. I think that we also need to look at where do we need to expand, where do we need to modify and change on current policies right now. See what other schools are doing to be able to make sure that we're counterwise with. That's what I think we also need to look at too, and that's what's good about the committee of the whole, because that is discussion coming out of the superintendent advisory that people on board can discuss and then figure out where they want to directionally go. Because the board itself has to make that decision. So
the plan currently right now is that you'll have a draft of some changes from the policy advisory council on 820, 880, and board press packet number 75. And if we can meet, which I believe we're scheduled to meet on the 23rd, will get you board press policy packet 76. So you'll have changes to review and discuss at the committee of the whole in September, and then we will put it on again, the agenda, in October.
So part of, because the board in the past has had a committee for policy so the board can discuss it, and that's fine. So part of being a new board and going forward is we have to get a mechanism or process. And so if you're going to discuss it in your advisory council or group, that's fine, but then the rest of us have to get your suggestions before the committee of the whole so we can think about them and react to them and come to the committee of the whole prepared. for
We're
that
having a lot of
discussion.
fun reading them and writing them and doing them
I
ahead
read
of time,
them.
trust
I bet
me.
I was
right?
part of the group that got to redo them.
So one of the things I'm working on, a draft that hopefully will come out this week's first Friday update as discussed at the retreat, is to try to kind of lay out a model for us. So not only with just policy, but with any type of action item for the board, so that you see it as new business in a meeting. You'll have a chance for more and have some initial discussion and explanation from the administration. You'll have an opportunity for more discussion at the committee of the whole, which will be the second time you'd see it. And then there would be the third a formal business meeting. So there's 2 weeks in between each of those for you to question the administration, ask for additional data, much like you did for tonight, and then you'd have it in a board packet. So there would be almost a month, 6 weeks before you'd have to take action on an item. That's the model I like to eventually.
But we need the information before we come to the committee of the whole,
Yeah,
just so that we can.
No, you are gonna get that.
Right,
Okay.
you'd get it in a board packet.
You would get a
like
board
you'd get
packet
in a-
that Friday before.
Before the committee of the whole.
Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am.
And that, with the agenda and everything would be in there. So, we don't want to make the committee of the whole meeting loosey-goosey. We'd rather follow, a pattern of what we want to report. Like Kevin said, I'm going to do the superintendent's report, principal will do her report, but then we'll also start talking about, one of the key things is looking at the advisory councils, what they're coming out with, getting feedback and discussion from the board.
Well, for the committee of the whole, do we need the principal report at the committee of the whole or just at the board meeting?
We'll
Because the
give you-
committee of the whole is more of a working meeting.
Kevin said,
We're going to give you all that in the agenda. But the reason we are wanting to do it at the committee of the whole is I want to try to establish a format where that's the meeting for reporting and discussing. We limit the items on there so that it's more thorough discussion for the board to get informed, discuss with each other, challenge each other, however we need to, so that we can thoroughly vet any recommendations and or reports from the administration. Because I think like with something like tonight, with Dr. Buzendey, that was a visitor. That was a presentation on something we're doing at the school. What eventually I'd like to do as these committees of the wholes move forward under my administration is have different departments come up. And if we limit them to 15 minutes, that might not give you the opportunities you need to ask more questions or to find out why they need certain expenditures in their budget or why they don't, or why they need particular class sizes for some of the courses and why some are higher. I want to provide those reports so that there's additional time for you to have discussion with them and not have us looking at clocks or, so I wanted to leave committee of the whole for reporting and discussion, more or less.
Yeah, with today's presentation, we didn't have any preparation, so we certainly weren't prepared for that or what to expect or, so that would have been helpful.
okay. So, we've done the adoption budget. B, C, and D we talked a little bit about. E is facility rental agreement. That is also coming from a superintendent advisory council. Am I right, or what's happening with that?
With E, the Facilities Advisory Council has met once. We're trying to get a date scheduled again before September 27th. We're having a little trouble getting everybody, all the participants scheduled. At the minimal, the board will receive some revisions from the Advisory Council on the facilities rental agreement and some discussions of the language in that agreement. As you remember, we approved previously some of the charges to help us increase revenue as well as become cost neutral to some of our expenses for rentals and agreements. At the minimal, you'll receive some revisions to that language for that agreement and also some feedback of what was discussed. One of the other things we're looking at in that committee, we're working, or in that council, is that we're working with the facilities director as well as the athletic director, getting quarterly reports on facility usage. So you'll have some information on that on a regular basis. So we can highlight what areas are being used and somewhat of a quarterly summary of the revenues generated from facilities, which is different from what's happened in the past. And then we're also looking to have a discussion with the regional management team and district management team of Aramark just to discuss their overall reduction to their contract, which was agreed upon in the cuts, just for them to explain a little more thoroughly how the reduction amounted to how they reduced it on their side. That being said, they are a private company, But the recommendation was made at the council that we should sit at least and talk with them and discuss some points of their contract and some amendments to their contract. So that's currently what we're working on, and we'll have some more of that information in more detail, and at least for more discussion at the committee of the whole.
Okay. We have confidential closed session minutes. This will be an item discussed in closed session, and any action will be following the closed session.